Sometimes you get lucky with a great mother-in-law, and sometimes you don't. Am I the asshole for not telling my husband I'm pregnant again? I, a 36-year-old woman, have been married to my husband, who's 38, for 4 years, and we have one daughter together. Now I'm pregnant again, but this time, I haven't told my husband. Why? Because I don't want to deal with his mother, and I know that as soon as I tell him, he'll tell her. Let me explain why I'm feeling this way. When I got pregnant with our daughter, my husband called his mom when we were taking the test. It was supposed to be this intimate, private moment for the two of us, but the second the test was on the counter, he was on the phone with her. She rushed over like it was some kind of emergency. When the timer went off, he handed the test to his mom. Not me, her. She opened it, and when it came back positive, he hugged her, cried with her, and they left me standing there like some kind of third wheel in my own pregnancy reveal. I didn't even have time to process the fact that I was going to be a mom, because suddenly it was all about him and his mom. And that set the tone for the rest of the pregnancy. At our first ultrasound, when we saw the heartbeat, he held her hand instead of mine. They hugged, cried, shared the moment together, and once again, I was on the outside looking in. When I felt the baby move for the first time, he called her immediately, and they sat together, talking excitedly like I wasn't even there. It was like I didn't exist, just a vessel carrying their baby. She invited herself to every doctor's appointment. I had no say in anything because she'd already made decisions for me. Even the nursery, something I was excited to decorate on my own, was taken over by them. Together, they painted, picked out furniture, and arranged everything, despite my protests. I felt invisible. Every time I tried to assert myself, it was met with dismissal or a quick, "Oh, but it'll be fine." And then came the birth. After hours of labor, when my daughter was finally born, his mom held my baby before I did. I had just given birth, exhausted, emotionally raw, and his mom was the first one to hold her. I didn't even get to enjoy that first sacred moment with my daughter. I felt robbed. So now I'm pregnant again, and honestly, I've loved the fact that I've been able to experience everything on my own this time. I enjoyed seeing the positive test without anyone hovering over me. I got to hear the first heartbeat at my appointment without anyone else's opinions or presence overshadowing the moment. I've cherished those little first flutters in private, without having to share them with anyone. I'm almost 24 weeks along, and I haven't told a soul. I know it sounds crazy, but I'm happy. I feel more connected to this pregnancy than I ever did the first time, simply because I don't have anyone intruding on my experience. For once, I get to enjoy it for myself. But here's the thing. I know that eventually I'll have to tell him. And when I do, the floodgates will open, and his mother will be back in the picture, probably taking over like she did before. I can already see it happening. Her at every appointment, her making all the decisions again, and me getting pushed out of the way in my own pregnancy. That's why I've held off for so long. I just want to keep enjoying this for as long as I can before I lose it to them again. My husband is not a bad guy, but he has serious boundary issues with his mom. He doesn't see it as a problem. He thinks I'm overreacting and being hormonal whenever I bring it up. I've tried to tell him that I need these moments to be between us, but he just doesn't get it. For him, pregnancy is a family affair, and his mom is part of that family. But for me, pregnancy is something sacred between me, my body, and my baby. And I want my husband to be involved, not his mom. So, am I the asshole for keeping this pregnancy to myself and wanting to enjoy it alone, rather than sharing it with them like last time? Update. After reading the responses, I've been doing a lot of thinking. It's clear that my husband's relationship with his mom isn't going to change unless I set some firm boundaries. So I've decided to sit down with him and tell him about the pregnancy. But I'm also going to make it crystal clear that this time is going to be different. I will be the one to experience the special moments, and his mother will not be involved unless I say so. If he can't respect that, then we'll need to have a serious conversation about where our marriage is headed, because I refuse to feel like an outsider in my own life again. I love my husband, but this is something I'm not willing to compromise on anymore. I deserve to have these moments with him, and if he can't see that, then we have bigger issues than just his mom's involvement. Wish me luck. When Sean walked through the door that evening, I was ready. For the first time in months, I wasn't hiding. I wasn't in baggy sweaters or sweatpants like I had been since finding out I was pregnant. Instead, I wore tight maternity leggings and a long shirt that clearly showed my growing belly. His eyes widened the moment he saw me, his mouth dropping open in shock.
"You're pregnant?"
he asked, his voice soft, like he couldn't believe it. I nodded but didn't smile. The table was set with a special meal I had cooked, but the warmth that usually accompanied a moment like this wasn't there. His face shifted from disbelief to joy, and he stepped forward, reaching out, probably wanting to touch my belly to connect with the baby. But I stepped back, shaking my head, putting up a wall between us. "We need to talk first," I said, motioning to the kitchen table. I sat down, feeling the weight of what I was about to say, but I couldn't hold back any longer. He followed me, confusion written all over his face as he took a seat across from me. I pulled out the list I had been writing and rewriting for weeks. I needed him to understand. "I've thought about this a lot, Sean, and there are things we need to address before we move forward." I could see his confusion deepen as I unfolded the paper, and for a second I almost felt bad. But no, he needed to hear this. "These are the moments I missed when I was pregnant with Barbie," I started, keeping my voice as calm as I could. He blinked, his gaze shifting between the list and me.
"What do you mean, missed?"
I took a deep breath. "When I found out I was pregnant with Barbie, you called your mother when we were taking the test. She rushed over, and when the timer went off, you handed her the test, and you hugged her instead of me." His eyes flickered, and he leaned forward, trying to explain.
"I was just excited. I didn't mean to leave you out. You know how close my mom and I are, and she was right there with us."
I felt my frustration bubble up, but kept my voice steady. "That moment was supposed to be ours, Sean. I was the one carrying your child, but you gave her the test, and then you hugged her. What about me?" He opened his mouth to argue, but I didn't let him. I kept going. "And then at the first ultrasound when we saw Barbie's heartbeat, you held your mother's hand and cried with her, not me." He let out a sigh, running a hand through his hair.
It was a big moment for me, okay? I'd never experienced that before, and my mom was, I don't know, she's been through it all.
I couldn't believe how blind he still was. "Sean, I was lying there on that table, exposed, vulnerable, and you weren't even holding my hand. You were holding hers. I was the one carrying your baby, but you chose her again." He shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting this conversation. "Every time the baby moved, you'd call her. Every appointment she was there, holding your hand, talking to you, planning everything around me. Even the nursery." My voice broke slightly, but I pushed on. "Even after I told you I wanted to decorate it myself, you and your mother went ahead and did it. I didn't get to experience any of those moments. I didn't get to feel like I was part of it. It was like I was a bystander in my own pregnancy." Sean sat back, stunned.
I didn't realize.
"That's the problem, Sean. You never realized anything. Even at Barbie's birth, your mother held my baby before I did. Do you know how much that hurt? Do you even care?" He stared at me, mouth open, but he didn't seem to have any words. I could see him replaying all those moments in his head, trying to justify them. He opened his mouth again, but I shook my head. "I'm pregnant again, and I haven't told you because I wanted to enjoy it. For myself. I wanted to take a pregnancy test, hear the heartbeat, and feel the baby move without having to share it with her. I wanted those moments for myself, and I've loved it." He looked lost, like he didn't know where this was going.
So what are you saying?
I took a deep breath, steadying myself for what came next. "What I'm saying is that if you want to have a baby with your mother, then go ahead and figure that out. But this baby is ours. If you try to bring her into this pregnancy the way you did with Barbie, if you try to force me to accept her constant interference again, I'm leaving. I won't do this again." The room fell silent. Sean looked down at the table, then back up at me. I could see the guilt, the confusion, and a flicker of realization cross his face. But I wasn't going to wait for him to figure it out. I had made myself clear. Now it was his move. When Sean walked back into the house 2 hours later, his expression was enough to make my heart sink. His shoulders were slumped, and there was a heaviness in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Before he even came home, I had already braced myself for the confrontation. My phone had been buzzing with furious texts from his mother, Barbara.
"How dare you do this to us? What gives you the right? I'm the grandmother. You can't cut me out."
The messages kept pouring in, each more accusatory and venomous than the last. I stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, feeling the heat of my anger and frustration rising with every word she sent. When Sean finally came in, he looked like a man defeated. He sat down at the kitchen table across from me, sighing deeply. I could see he didn't want to say what he was about to, but I waited in silence.
"I went to talk to my mom,"
he admitted, his voice low.
"I told her what you said about how you felt during the pregnancy and everything. We were both floored, honestly. I mean, I've heard you bring up concerns before, but I never really listened."
He ran a hand through his hair, glancing up at me with guilt all over his face.
I'm sorry, I should have listened sooner.
I could feel a small knot loosen in my chest at his apology, but the storm was far from over. My phone buzzed again, and I looked down at the new voicemail notification.
You made my baby miss out on the beginning of this pregnancy.
Her voice seethed through the phone as I played it.
What makes you think you can do this to us? Grandparents have rights too, and I'll be using every one of mine to be in this baby's life.
I hit pause and looked at Sean, then handed the phone to him, and he scrolled through the endless texts.
Has she always been like this?
He asked, watching my face carefully. I stared at him, his brow furrowed. I nodded slowly. Pretty much. I leaned back in my chair, waiting for him to say more, but his phone buzzed in his pocket, and I noticed the look of discomfort cross his face. He pulled it out, glanced down at the screen, and shoved it back into his pocket. What's she saying? I asked, my voice calm but insistent.
Nothing.
He muttered, his eyes avoiding mine. Let me see. My request wasn't a question, it was a demand.
No.
He said, but the hesitation in his voice gave him away. Let me. See, I repeated, leaning forward and holding out my hand. Reluctantly, he handed me the phone. As I scrolled through the messages, my stomach twisted. Each text was worse than the last. A carefully constructed plan Barbara had already begun piecing together in her mind.
She's a working mum. The kids need better care. We can let her leave. I'll move in. I'll take care of them. We'll figure it all out.
It wasn't just about boundaries anymore. She had convinced herself that I wasn't fit to care for my own children, that somehow she was entitled to them. I felt a chill run down my spine as I pushed the phone back to Sean across the table. You have some decisions to make, I said quietly, the weight of the situation pressing down on both of us. And so do I. Sean stared at the phone, his face pale and his hand trembling slightly. He looked up at me, eyes filled with uncertainty. But I wasn't going to let this go. I had set my boundaries, and now it was up to him to decide where his loyalties lay. Do what you need to do, I repeated, my voice steady. But I won't let her destroy this experience for me, not again. Sean sat there speechless, as the reality of what his mother had done started to sink in. And for the first time, I saw him begin to understand that this wasn't just about my pregnancy or his mother's excitement. It was about control, about respect, about protecting the family we had built, even if that meant standing up to the person who had always been at the center of his world. Sean had made his decision, and this pregnancy was ours. We spent nights curled up on the couch, feeling the baby's flutters, laughing as each kick surprised us. It was all so different from when I was pregnant with Barbie, where I was a spectator in my own experience. This time, I had a partner, someone who was truly present for me, for us, and it felt like we were finally getting the chance to enjoy everything we had missed the first time around. But of course, Barbara couldn't let go. She wasn't allowed to contact me anymore per Sean's request, but the texts didn't stop, each one a passive-aggressive dig wrapped in an offer I didn't want.
I would bring over a casserole, but Sean said I wouldn't be welcome. I would come and clean for you, but Sean said you wouldn't appreciate it. Don't forget to wash Sean's socks. He says he's out of clean underwear.
Sean had done his own laundry for as long as I could remember, and the fact that she'd bring up something so ridiculous only highlighted how out of touch she was. But the one that truly grated on my nerves?
If this baby is a boy, he'll need a wardrobe of blue. I'd like to start shopping, but Sean said you want to buy your own clothes.
We were both happy, genuinely happy this time. We worked on the nursery together, chose the colors, the furniture. It was like rediscovering something beautiful in our marriage, a connection that had been lost in all the noise during Barbie's pregnancy. One day, my doctor's office called, asking if I was transferring my care to another clinic. A nurse from a nearby facility had called to request my medical records. I assured them I had no intention of leaving and asked them to note in my file that no information was to be shared without my direct consent. I didn't think much of it until the next day when I received another text from Barbara.
I just want to be involved. Now you've blocked me in every way possible. You are a terrible human being.
I showed it to Sean. He frowned and sighed, the familiar weight of it pulling at him.
I'll talk to her.
He promised. But the next day, things escalated. When I went to pick Barbie up from preschool, she wasn't there. Panic seized me. My heart raced as I called Sean. Did you give your mom permission to pick her up? I demanded. There was a long pause before his exhausted sigh came through the line.
I haven't talked to her.
That was it. I drove straight to Barbara's house, walked in without knocking, and calmly gathered Barbie's things. Barbara stood in the doorway, watching me with a smug look on her face. If this continues, I'll get a restraining order, I told her, my voice even. This isn't a game. I notified the school that Barbara was no longer allowed to pick Barbie up. They raised their eyebrows at me, but added the necessary notes to her file. The next day, the school called. Barbara had shown up again, trying to take Barbie. They didn't let her, thankfully, but I was furious. I called Sean. "You need to fix this, or I will." His response was silence. Then the text came, from her.
You might be able to keep the unborn baby from me, but wait until the baby's here. I'll have all 3 of them. You'll see.
That was the final straw. I went to the police and filed for a restraining order. The judge granted it. After her second arrest for violating it, she stopped. Sean still went to visit her, though. He never took Barbie with him again. He'd leave for his weekly dinners, but after a few more weeks, he stopped going. He never explained why, and I didn't ask. I was 35 weeks along, and I had more important things to focus on than the broken relationship between him and his mother. My own mother came to stay with us the week before my due date, helping me finalize the nursery and taking Barbie to and from preschool. It felt good to have that support, the kind that didn't come with strings attached. When I went into labor, everything seemed to be falling into place. But of course, Barbara had her ways. She showed up 5 hours into my labor, waltzing into the birthing room as though she belonged there. Sean immediately blocked her from coming any closer to me. It took 4 hospital staff members to drag her out of the room. After Charlie, our beautiful baby boy, was born, Sean cut the cord, and for the first time, his tears were for me, not for her. We had done this together. It was perfect. But when we returned home, an envelope with legal papers was waiting for us. Sean opened it, his face unreadable as he skimmed through the documents.
She wants the house back.
He said, his voice hollow. Barbara had let us rent her old home for a fraction of what it was worth when she downsized, but now she was taking it back.
I'll fix this.
Sean said, grabbing his coat. He kissed me on the forehead, then gently kissed Charlie's head where he was nursing. As he walked out the door, I watched him go, knowing this was a battle I couldn't fight for him. But I also knew that for the first time, I wasn't alone in this fight. Sean was with me, and that made all the difference. Sean went to his boss and asked for a transfer, a fresh start in a different territory, far away from his mother's constant meddling. It would mean uprooting our lives, moving Barbie to a new school, and I'd need to find a job in a new city. But the thought of finally being free from Barbara's suffocating presence was worth it. When Sean told me he got the transfer, I couldn't have been more thrilled. We quietly packed up our lives. The movers came, loaded up our things, and we had the house deep cleaned before we left.
I'm so excited about the new adventure.
Don't worry, we'll take good care of your stuff.
Even though it was a bit overwhelming, we knew this was the best decision for our family. Sean went to visit his mother one last time to return the keys. He didn't tell me much about that visit when he got back, but something had changed in him. He came home a different man. Without a word, he took my phone and blocked his mother's number. Then, he did the same on his own. We didn't have social media profiles, so there was no need to worry about that. The finality of it all settled in, but I didn't push him to talk. I figured he'd share when he was ready. It wasn't until months later, after we were settled and comfortable in our new home, that late one night the subject came up. We were lounging on the couch, Charlie fast asleep on Sean's chest, and Barbie stretched across my lap, her soft snores filling the quiet room. Sean was absent-mindedly rubbing Charlie's back, his face calm but distant, like he was lost in thought. "What happened when you gave her the keys back? Are you ready to talk about it yet?" "If you're not ready, I understand, but I am curious." He took a deep breath and shifted slightly, careful not to disturb Charlie. His voice was low as he started speaking.
I guess it's time I tell you.
He explained how he'd driven to his mother's house with the keys in his pocket, bracing himself for whatever scene might unfold. When he got there, Barbara had been waiting, all smiles, as if nothing had happened. She opened the door and eagerly ushered him inside, her eyes darting behind him, searching.
Did you bring the baby?
No, I just brought your keys. Our things are cleared out and we had the house deep cleaned. If there's anything that needs attention, just let me know. I even cut the grass one last time.
He laid the keys on her kitchen table with a soft clatter, but the air between them was heavy with unspoken words. Barbara's smile faded, confusion clouding her face.
What are you talking about, Sean?
You had us served with eviction papers, Mom.
He said quietly.
We're leaving. We're done.
She blinked at him, then her face twisted in anger.
I didn't think you'd actually go through with it. You're my son, Sean. When you said you wanted to come over tonight, I thought you were coming to apologize. Not this. You can't just take my grandchildren away from me. You're choosing her over your own mother.
Sean told me how she'd ranted, throwing every manipulative tactic she could muster at him. Guilt, tears, accusations. She'd tried to make him feel like he was betraying her, like I was the one tearing our family apart. But this time, he didn't let her get to him.
I told her that I was done, that I wasn't going to let her destroy our family anymore.
Sean said, his voice tight as he recalled the moment.
I told her that this wasn't about choosing sides, it was about doing what was right for my wife and my kids. I told her that her behavior was toxic, and if she couldn't respect our boundaries, then she wasn't welcome in our lives.
I could see the pain in his eyes as he recounted the conversation, but there was also a sense of finality in his words. He had stood up to her, and it had cost him a relationship he'd spent his whole life navigating carefully. But it was a cost he was finally willing to pay.
She didn't take it well.
He continued.
She started screaming, saying she'd fight for custody, that I'd regret this. But by then, I didn't care. I walked out, left the keys on the table, and never looked back.
I reached over and placed my hand on his, squeezing gently. I'm sorry it had to be like that. Sean shook his head, his gaze softening as he looked at me.
It was long overdue. I'm just sorry I didn't see it sooner. I should have protected you from her from the start.
We sat there in silence for a while, the weight of everything settling in, but it was a good silence. We had weathered the storm, and now, as I watched him hold Charlie and felt Barbie's small weight across my lap, I knew we were stronger for it. Whatever had happened in that final conversation between Sean and Barbara, it was clear that he had made his choice. Our family, our future, was his priority now. And as we sat together surrounded by the peace of our new life, I realized that we had finally found the one thing we had been searching for all along: freedom and long-awaited peace.
Thanks so much for listening to today's story. If you enjoyed it, be sure to give this video a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss out on our daily stories. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this Am I the Asshole? So what do you think about this situation? Drop a comment below. Do you think they were in the right or wrong? Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.